So I'd like to begin by welcoming everyone back to this Cultivating Mental Balance and Wellbeing program. This is the second of 3 weekends in this program. So 2 weeks ago, we looked at the motivational attentional balance part of the program, where we looked at the preliminary practices, shamatha practice, and in particular this resting and awareness practice. And this weekend or today, we'll be looking at the second part, that is the cognitive balance aspect. And we'll be looking there in general at the Vipassana practice, in particular looking at this emptiness, this wisdom of emptiness, and then also specifically the nature of mind. And then the third part of this program in 2 weeks' time, we'll be looking at emotional balance, where we'll be introducing in general the compassion practice, exchanging self with others practice, and then lastly, how to integrate all these 4 areas of practice into an effective whole in a systematic way. The schedule will be the same as the last weekend we did, 3 sessions, a 30-minute break in between each session, finishing at 1:30 in the afternoon. And format, again, the same of each session. We'll start with a guided meditation, a presentation of the materials, another guided meditation, and then we'll finish with some question answer. So if you have any questions, then please write them in the chat during the session, and then Nitzan will read them out at the end of the session. The recommended reading for this program are 4 books covering each one of these 4 areas. And they're all books from Alan Wallace. The book relevant to this weekend is a book called Minding Closely, 4 Applications of Mindfulness, to do with the cognitive balance or Vipassana practice. And the basis of this program is we are using this article here called Mental Balance and Wellbeing, Building Bridges Between Buddhism and Western Psychology. A paper, an article written by Alan Wallace, a well-known Buddhist, and Shauna Shapiro, a well-known psychologist, and they're putting forward a model to build bridges between Buddhism and psychology, this 4-fold model of well-being. That's what we're using as a basis for our discussions in this program. So let's begin this first session, session 1 of the 3 sessions to do with cognitive balance. In this session, we'll begin with a meditation just to first settle body, speech, and mind, to relax the body, relax the mind, setting a good motivation for the sessions here today. Following that, we'll do a review of some of the main points from the first session, the first part of this program, before we go on to introduce this idea of cognitive balance. And then specifically with respect to that, introduce Vipassana practice. We'll do a meditation, a Vipassana meditation, looking at impermanence with respect to the body. Following that, we'll introduce the topic of suffering, which is one of the main Vipassana practices as an insight into suffering. And then finish with question answer at the end of the session. Let's begin then with a meditation, finding a nice comfortable posture. Let's begin. Allowing your awareness to descend into the body and simply become aware of sensations throughout the body. And if you notice any areas of tightness or tension in any part of the body, then use the out breath to relax and release that tightness or tension. and relaxing more deeply with each out-breath. And bringing your awareness to the area of your face, and soften and relax all the muscles in the face. The mouth and jaw, soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes, soft and relaxed. And in this way, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Not trying to control or regulate the breath in any way. Simply allowing it to flow naturally and effortlessly. And then preparing the mind, setting it into a state of ease and relaxation, releasing all activities of the mind, and simply allowing the mind to come to rest, in the present moment, resting in stillness. Allowing the mind to remain relaxed, still, and clear. And then setting a positive motivation for attending the sessions here today. And try to make your motivation as expansive as possible. And then just for a short time, Become aware of the sensations of the breath throughout the body. Noticing any sensations in the body associated with the in and out flow of the breath. And then whilst maintaining that relaxed body and relaxed mind, we can slowly end the meditation and begin our discussions together here today. Let's start with a short review of some of the main points from the last weekend. As I mentioned, the basis for this program is this article called Mental Balance and Wellbeing, Building Bridges Between Buddhism and Western Psychology by well-known Buddhist Alan Wallace and well-known psychologist Shauna Shapiro. And in this, they're putting together a model, a fourfold model of well-being to build bridges between Buddhism and Western psychology. And so they introduce these idea of these four types of mental balance, of motivational balance in the article called Cognitive Balance, Attentional Balance, Cognitive Balance, and Emotional Balance. In the article, it's referred to as Affective Balance. And with each one of these four types of mental balance, they talk about three types of imbalance that we need to overcome, to rectify. That we talk about deficit, not enough of that, hyperactivity, too much, or dysfunction, wrong type. And so very briefly, again, the four types of mental balance that are proposed in this model as an effective way of striving for genuine happiness or state of inner well-being. That motivational cognitive balance, the article says, results from reality-based desires and intentions that are oriented towards one's own and others' happiness. This comes within what's called the preliminary practices in Buddhism. And then attentional balance is the ability to sustain a voluntary flow of attention with a quality of awareness that is suffused by ease, focus, and clarity. This correlates in Buddhism with shamatha practice. These two we looked at in the last weekend, the motivational and attentional balance. This weekend, the cognitive balance, it says, the article, entails engaging with the world of experience without imposing assumptions or ideas on events and thereby misapprehending or distorting them. And this correlates with, in Buddhism, what's called the Vipassana practice. And then in the next weekends, we'll be looking at emotional or affective balance, which the article says entails a freedom from excessive emotional vacillation, emotional apathy, and inappropriate emotions. And this correlates with what's called compassion practice in Buddhism. And here the article talks about presenting them in a linear way. First, we introduce cognitive or motivational balance because this really sets the course for the other three types of mental balance. And then attentional balance is presented next because this is a necessary basis to be able to effectively cultivate both a cognitive and emotional balance. And so we end up with this model here, first cultivating motivational balance or cognitive balance, On that basis, attentional balance, and then on the basis of attentional balance, both cognitive and emotional balance. Or from a Buddhist perspective, first engage in preliminary practices as a foundation for engaging in shamatha practice. And then on the basis of shamatha practice, we can effectively engage in both vipassana and compassion practice. But also, so even though it's presented in a linear way, the model goes on to say, and this is also the case within Buddhism, that it's not a strict linear progression, that actually as we develop one area of mental balance, that will support and enhance the other three. So we are to have an integrated approach to practice to be effective in striving for this mental balance and well-being. And we'll talk more about this, how to set up this integrated approach in the next weekend, the last session. We'll focus on that. And so the first type of mental balance we looked at in the last weekend was the first weekend of the three, is this cognitive or motivational balance. Here, the article again says it entails intentions and volitions that are conducive to one's own and others' well-being. And so here, the three types of imbalance. Deficit, meaning not enough, is, the article says, an apathetic loss of motivation for happiness. We have no desire for happiness. We've lost that. Or hyperactivity is about fixating on obsessive goals that obscure the reality of the present. And dysfunction is desiring things detrimental to one's own and others' well-being. How to overcome these imbalances, how to overcome deficit, so to remedy an apathy or loss of motivation for happiness. The article says we can do this by meditating on the realities of impermanence and suffering and the possibility of generating well-being. So no matter how what the situation looks like, that it seems like we're stuck, there's no way we can change or develop happiness, that everything's impermanent. So now, even if our current situation is not optimal, things can change, we can improve. And to really appreciate, what does suffering mean? And that it's not so much what is happening to us, but how we respond to what happens to us. And therefore, that we can change, we can create the causes for well-being, and it's possible to generate a state of inner well-being, to overcome the deficit. Hyperactivity, we remedy obsessive desire with the cultivation of contentment, understanding that chasing after all these sensory pleasures and so forth is never really going to lead to lasting, genuine happiness, and therefore to be really content with the basic necessities in life, and then to turn our mind inwards instead. And dysfunction, it says here, remedy mistaken goals with the experiential recognition of the true causes of both suffering and well-being. And so therefore, to understand that really the source of suffering and the source of happiness is nowhere out there, lies within our own mind. And how to do this from the Buddhist perspective, we saw that these common preliminary practices, specifically these what's called the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. First, to reflect on precious human life, that we've got a life full of opportunity, and to have an aspiration to make it meaningful. And then to reflect on death and impermanence, to understand this precious opportunity we have is not going to last forever. And the third point is to reflect on the causality of our actions, that harmful actions lead to suffering, beneficial actions lead to happiness, and thereby to adopt an ethical lifestyle as the basis for striving for genuine happiness and inner well-being. And then really to reflect on suffering and its causes, and happiness and its causes, to come to see that both the causes of happiness, causes of suffering lies within our own mind. And then we can really develop this cognitive balance. We can have reality-based aspirations and desires, striving for our own and others' genuine happiness and well-being. And then on that basis, if we've set the direction in a healthy direction, if we have a healthy worldview in terms of where is the source of happiness, where is the source of suffering, then we can engage in attentional balance training. And we saw there that attentional balance is the ability to sustain a voluntary flow of attention with a quality of awareness that is suffused by ease, focus, and clarity. And so here, the same three types of imbalance. Deficit is, the article says, characterized by an inability to focus vividly on a chosen object. So deficit, not enough, is when our mind is sinking, what's called laxity. Hyperactivity occurs when the mind is excessively aroused, resulting in compulsive distraction and agitation. Here, the imbalance is what's called excitation. And then dysfunction, when people focus on things in afflictive ways that are not conducive to their own and others' well-being. This dysfunctional way of attending, we address very effectively in the other three types of mental balance. So here, in attentional balance training, we are looking overcoming deficit and hyperactivity. In other words, laxity and excitation. How do we overcome them? The article says, these imbalances of laxity and excitation are remedied through the cultivation of mindfulness and meta-attention. The word used here in Buddhism is introspection. So this is what we use to overcome these imbalances. And so we do this through the shamatha practice, the practice of cultivating a calm, clear, focused mind. And here in the shamatha practice, not only are we overcoming these two imbalances of laxity and excitation, and therefore being able to develop not only a stable, but a clear, focused mind, but also on the basis of relaxation. That it's important to initially establish a basis of relaxation to overcome any tension in the body and mind. And in that way, we can effectively work at overcoming these two faults or imbalances of laxity and excitation, and thereby really cultivate a very calm, clear, and focused mind. And we do this by focusing on an object. And the article here is very much recommended to use mindfulness of breathing, one of the most widely used objects in Buddhist practice. And we saw there we can talk about three variations of this breath practice. First, focusing anywhere in the body, any sensations connected with the breath. The full body breath practice. This is very good for cultivating relaxation. Then we can focus at the area of the abdomen. This is particularly good for improving stability of attention, overcoming excitation. And then focusing at the entrance of the nostrils, very good for enhancing clarity of attention and thereby overcoming that imbalance of laxity. And so we saw there that we do this through these two tools of mindfulness and introspection. The article calls introspection meta-attention. That's more a sort of a psychology term. Metacognition, sometimes it's called as well. And so here, mindfulness is simply our ability to hold the object. And then introspection or meta-attention is simply monitoring that mindfulness. How are we going? Are we still focused on the object, or are we starting to fall into either laxity or excitation? So these are the two tools we use to remedy these two imbalances of laxity and excitation. And here then it says how to do that. The article says, while the attention is mindfully engaged with the respiration, one metacognitively monitors the meditative process, noting as swiftly as possible the occurrence of either laxity or excitation. And here it says, when laxity sets in, the primary remedy is to arouse the attention by taking a fresh interest in the object of meditation. One of the most common reasons we fall into laxity or sinking, simply lost interest in the practice. And so here we have these three key terms that can remind us what to do when we fall into laxity or dullness. First, refresh our interest in the practice, then restore our attention on the object, and then retain that ongoing flow of mindfulness of the object. And the article goes on to say, whereas when the mind becomes agitated, the first thing to do is to relax more deeply. So when our mind gets agitated, excitation, distracted, first relax body and mind, release any distraction, and then very gently return to the object, holding it again with mindfulness. The article says, in this way, the attentional imbalances of laxity and excitation may be overcome. And thereby we can cultivate attentional balance, cultivate a very calm, clear, focused mind. And then on that basis, we can effectively engage in the other two areas of mental balance, of cognitive and emotional balance. And so let's have a look now at cognitive balance. This is the topic for today, and then emotional balance we'll address in 2 weeks' time in the third part of this program. And so here, cognitive balance, the article says, entails engaging with the world of experience without imposing conceptual assumptions or ideas on events and thereby misapprehending or distorting them. It therefore involves being calmly and clearly present with experience as it arises moment by moment. And so here we can see again the importance of this attentional balance, that if we want to cultivate cognitive balance, the article says we need to be able to be calmly and clearly present with experience as it arises moment by moment. But if we don't have attentional balance, if we don't have a calm, clear, focused mind, we won't be able to do that. Therefore, we won't be able to effectively achieve this cognitive balance without some attentional balance, and hence the order in which they're presented here. And so let's have a look at the 3 types of imbalance here then in this program, in this cognitive balance. So deficit, not enough in terms of cognitive balance, is, the article says, at times people are simply absent-minded, meaning we're not actually seeing what's in front of us. Deficit. Hyperactivity, it says, on other occasions, they get caught up in their assumptions and expectations, failing to distinguish between perceived realities and their fantasies. So we're projecting a lot of things onto reality that's in front of us. That's hyperactivity. And dysfunction, it says, and they are generally prone to misapprehending events in a myriad of ways due to cognitive deficit and hyperactivity imbalances. So due to both deficit and hyperactivity, then we misapprehend things that are in front of us. And the article talks about an example used in Buddhism to exemplify this. A commonly cited example in Buddhism is mistaking a coiled rope for a snake. So the analogy is that you're walking along a path where it's a little bit dark, something's coiled up on the side of the path, you can't see very clearly. So this, it says, because one does not initially perceive this object clearly, this is a cognitive deficit. So we can't see what's actually there. One is prone to projecting one's fears or expectations on the object, cognitive hyperactivity. We think it's a snake there, so we project a lot of fear and so forth onto the object, resulting in the misidentification of the object. We think it's really a snake there. And so some examples of cognitive dysfunction, how we misapprehend objects, is we tend to see things which are changing as unchanging. We tend to see pleasure as happiness. We see where there's no self, a self, and we see things which are dependent as independent. And so we'll look at each one of those 4 examples of cognitive dysfunction and how to overcome them in these sessions here today. How do we overcome these imbalances? The article says, according to Buddhism, the distinguishing characteristic of what we are referring to as cognitive balance is that one views the world without the imbalances of cognitive hyperactivity, deficit, or dysfunction. Overcoming such cognitive imbalances is a central theme in Buddhist practice, where one of the primary interventions is the application of discerning mindfulness to whatever arises from moment to moment. So we need to apply mindfulness to whatever we perceive. And here the article goes on to say, the faculty of mindfulness, as previously defined, as we saw in Attentional Balance 2 weeks ago, is initially cultivated as a means to overcome attentional imbalances. And then it is applied to daily experience in order to achieve cognitive balance. So here, mindfulness is key in both attentional balance and cognitive balance. And so we are cultivating mindfulness, strengthening our mindfulness to achieve attentional balance in shamatha practice. Whereas here, to achieve cognitive balance, we are then applying that mindfulness that we cultivated in attentional balance to gain insights into reality, to overcome these imbalances of deficit, hyperactivity, and dysfunction. And so therefore, this is Vipassana practice, to apply mindfulness in this way. to overcome these imbalances. So what is Vipassana practice? Vipassana is a Sanskrit term. The Pali term equivalent is Vipassana. The VI prefix means higher or superior. Pasana or pasana means to see. So it means higher seeing, seeing beyond. Usually Vipassana is translated into English as either special insight or simply insight. And so it's the practice, again, of applying mindfulness to gain insights into the nature of reality, to overcome this cognitive dysfunction, these distorted views that we have of reality. And here again are these 4 distorted views that we're going to be looking at in these sessions here today. We tend to see things which are changing as unchanging. And so we can apply mindfulness to come to an insight into impermanence, that everything's changing moment by moment, to overcome that imbalance, that cognitive dysfunction. Come to see the second dysfunction is seeing pleasure as happiness. And here, by applying mindfulness to come to an insight into suffering, we can overcome that cognitive dysfunction. And then the third cognitive dysfunction is seeing where there's no self, a self. And so we engage in the applying mindfulness to come to an insight into no self, to overcome that imbalance. And then lastly, we tend to see things which are dependent as independent. And here we apply mindfulness to come to this insight into emptiness, to come to realize everything exists dependently, thereby overcoming this cognitive dysfunction. And so then when we talk about Vipassana practice, then in the Theravada Buddhist traditions, based on the Pali scriptures, we talk about these 4 applications of mindfulness. We're applying mindfulness to investigate 4 things to come to these insights, to overcome these imbalances, to overcome these distorted views. So first we apply mindfulness to the body. Then we apply mindfulness to feelings, that is our pleasant, unpleasant, neutral experiences. Then we apply mindfulness to our mind. And then we apply mindfulness to phenomena in general, to come to these insights, to come to see everything's changing moment by moment, insight into impermanence, to come to an insight into suffering, to come to an insight into no self. And so this is the Vipassana practice we see classic within the Theravada Buddhist traditions. And so let's have a look now at the first of those 3 Vipassana practices, the Vipassana practice of impermanence. Impermanence in Sanskrit is anitya, in Pali anicca, and it literally means changing. And here we can talk about coarse impermanence and subtle impermanence. Coarse impermanence is things simply eventually coming to an end. Whereas here, when we talk about an insight into impermanence, we're really talking about an insight into subtle impermanence. That is, to come to an insight that things are changing moment by moment. But you might say, well, why do I need to do this Vipassana practice? Because I already know that everything's changing moment by moment. Science, I think, has proven that conclusively, and I accept that. So I don't need to do this Vipassana practice. But here, to overcome these imbalances, this cognitive dysfunction, intellectual understanding is not enough. I think that most of us, if not all of us, intellectually accept that everything's changing moment by moment. But we still have this cognitive dysfunction of experientially seeing things as rather stable and not really changing very much. That's how we interact with things. So this is cognitive dysfunction. So this Vipassana practice of impermanence is about bringing our intellectual understanding of impermanence into experience, and thereby experientially overcoming this cognitive dysfunction, to be able to see clearly, experientially, that everything around us is changing moment by moment. And if we can do that, then we'll be more in harmony with the flow of life. We'll use the flow of life to our advantage instead of fighting against it, instead of trying to hold on to the pleasant things that are flowing past us in our life, instead of trying to push away the unpleasant things that are flowing past us in our life. And thereby, we will be able to reduce our attachment. Because if we can simply see things as constantly changing, there's nothing for attachment to grab hold of. And therefore, actually, we'll enjoy simple pleasures in life much more, because we won't be trying to grab hold of them with craving and attachment and thereby destroying our pleasurable experience. We'll simply enjoy that pleasurable experience when it's there. But at a deeper level, this insight into impermanence also serves as a basis for the other insights, an insight into suffering, to come to see that pleasure is not happiness, that pleasure is not going to give us any lasting, genuine happiness, because pleasure is stimulus-based, and therefore it's temporary, it's transient, it's not genuine happiness, and thereby help us to come to this insight into suffering. And then also it will help us to come to an insight into no self, because if we can see that everything, including our own body and mind, is constantly changing and flowing, then where is there a self to be found in that flow? Now it seems to be a self here, but if we have this insight into impermanence, it's not so difficult to come to realize, to see there's no sort of autonomous self here. There's just flow. So impermanence has a lot of benefits in itself, and it's very much the basis for all the other types of Vipassana practices, including the Vipassana practice of emptiness, which we'll be looking at later. And so what we'll do now is we will do a meditation, a Vipassana meditation. So we'll be applying the mindfulness that we've cultivated in attentional balance, and we'll begin by applying mindfulness to the body. That's where we start. It's most easy to start there. And we'll be applying mindfulness to the body to overcome the first of the 4 cognitive dysfunctions. That is, seeing things which are changing as unchanging. And so thereby we'll be applying mindfulness to the body, investigating the body, looking at the body, to come to see experientially that everything in the body is changing moment by moment, and thereby gaining that insight, overcoming that cognitive imbalance. And we'll be doing this through scanning the body. We'll simply scan through the body from the crown of our head to the tips of our feet, and just experientially seeing, is there anything there that is stable and unchanging, or is everything changing moment by moment? So we'll be looking on the basis of that question. That's how we'll be applying mindfulness, is looking at the reality of your body based on that question. Is there anything there stable and unchanging, or is everything changing moment by moment? Let's do that practice now. Find a nice, comfortable posture. Let's begin. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. A vigilant posture is to keep the back nice and straight. And then at the same time, allow the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And using the out-breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And with each out breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. Resting in that stillness. Allowing the mind to remain relaxed, still, and clear. And then we can begin our Vipassana practice by applying mindfulness to the body, investigating the reality of the body through scanning the body on the basis of the question, is there anything in the body that is stable and unchanging, or is everything changing moment by moment? And we can begin by bringing our attention to the crown of our head and notice any sensations there. And then bringing your attention slowly down to the area of your face and notice any sensations there. Looking very closely at those sensations. Are they static or are they constantly changing? Look closely. And bringing your awareness slowly around to the back of your head, noticing any sensations there. Moving down to the area of the neck, noticing any sensations. And then across to the left shoulder. The left upper arm. And moving slowly down to the left forearm. And moving down to the left hand. Right down to the tips of the fingers, noticing any sensations. And then moving back up to the right shoulder. The right upper arm. Moving down to the right forearm. And slowly down to the right hand. Right down to the fingertips. Moving back up to the upper back area. Moving slowly down to the middle back area. And moving slowly down to the lower back area. Noticing any sensations there. Look closely. Moving back up to the upper chest area. Moving down to the middle chest area. Moving down to the area of the stomach. And slowly down to the abdomen. Noticing any sensations there. And moving across to the left hip. Moving slowly down to the left thigh. Down to the left knee. Moving slowly down to the left calf. The left ankle. And moving slowly down to the left foot. Right down to the tips of the toes. Noticing any sensations. And then moving back up to the right hip. Moving slowly down to the right thigh. Down to the right knee. The right calf. Moving slowly down to the right ankle. And down to the right foot. Right down to the tips of the toes. And now simply become aware of sensations throughout the body. Is there anything stable in the body, or is everything changing moment by moment? Look closely at sensations throughout the body. We can bring the meditation to a close. We'll now briefly look at this insight into suffering to overcome this cognitive dysfunction or distorted view of seeing pleasure as happiness. When we use the word suffering here, it's a translation of the Sanskrit and Pali term dukkha, which literally means bad space or hole, meaning something's not quite right. And so here the word suffering has a much broader meaning than what we normally associate with the word suffering. For us, the word suffering usually means some sort of unpleasant, painful physical or mental experience. But here that's only part of dukkha, of suffering. We can talk about the dukkha of suffering, which is talking about our unpleasant experiences. So these are very obvious to us. There's some things we don't really like. But we also included here, we can talk about the dukkha of change, which is referring to our pleasant experiences, because this is also part of the human condition, that sometimes we have pleasurable experiences, but here we normally identify our pleasurable experiences as happiness. But we can come to realize here that our pleasurable experiences are not really in the nature of happiness, because if they were, it would mean that the more we engaged in our pleasurable experiences, the more happy we should become. But we know from our own experience that if we overindulge in our pleasant experiences, not only don't they make us more happy, they often induce a lot of unnecessary suffering. Classic example, eating too much of our favorite dessert. Too much doesn't make us more happy. We just get indigestion, feel sick. But there's something deeper going on here in terms of the human condition than simply pleasant and unpleasant experiences. So this insight into suffering or dukkha at its deepest level is an insight into what's called all-pervasive suffering or all-pervasive dukkha. And that is that no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, there's always a potential for suffering to arise in our life. That potential is always there. So at the deepest, and why is that potential there? Is because our mind is contaminated by mental afflictions. Meaning as long as our mind is contaminated by craving, attachment, anger, jealousy, frustration, fear, anxiety, and so forth, then suffering can arise at any moment. This is the deepest understanding of this insight into suffering. So if we do this Vipassana practice of suffering, of applying mindfulness to investigate our body, mind, and phenomena, to come to see these insights, not only that pleasant experiences aren't happiness, but at a deeper level, there's always a potential for suffering to arise in our life, then there's enormous benefits. Because if we can gain this insight through this Vipassana practice, we will reduce craving and attachment to pleasant experiences because we'll realize they're not going to bring us any lasting, genuine happiness. And therefore, we'll enjoy simple pleasures much more. And we'll realize that there's no genuine happiness to be found out there. It really lies within our own mind. And that the source of suffering is not out there. It also lies within our own mind. It's our mental afflictions. And therefore, this insight will help to lead us to a wish to be liberated from suffering, which is often translated as renunciation, by realizing that the cause of suffering is not out there. It's within our own mind. It's our mental afflictions that's the underlying source of our suffering. And then also this insight into suffering will help lead us to have compassion for others. We'll realize that not only ourselves are stuck in this situation, in this state of dukkha or suffering, but everyone else is. And thereby we can not only develop a wish for ourselves to be liberated from suffering, but a wish to help liberate others from suffering. So this is compassion, that wish that they be free of suffering and its causes. So this insight into suffering can really be very helpful in terms of these benefits, not only overcoming that cognitive dysfunction of grasping pleasure as happiness, but also at a deeper level, again, helping us to develop the aspiration to be free of suffering, and then also to help us to cultivate compassion for others. And we'll be looking at this a little bit more detail in 2 weeks' time when we look at how to cultivate emotional balance. So this is the second of the 3 insights that we are cultivating in this Vipassana practice here within the Theravada Buddhist traditions. The first insight, again, was into impermanence. The second one into suffering. The third insight that we're going to cultivate is an insight into no self. And we'll look at that and we'll meditate on that at the beginning of the next session. That's all I wanted to cover in the first session today. So we've got time for question and answer now. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. You can write them in the chat, and Nitzan will read them out. Or if you prefer, you can simply ask them directly by putting your hand up in the Zoom and then unmuting and switching on the webcam and ask the question directly. So do we have any questions, Nitzan?
Hi, everyone. Not yet. We don't have any questions yet. People can think.
I have a question. First, thank you so much, Glen. So inspiring this session was. My question is, while I was doing the Vipassana practice, how the sensation in the body actually gives me an insight of the changing, that everything is changing in the body. This is my question.
Mm-hmm. The body, we are aware of the body through the tactile sensations. I mean, we can be visually aware of the body as well, but here the reality of the body is we're aware of it through the tactile sensations. And now, because we haven't got very good mindfulness, so we saw there that to actually gain these insights, we need to have cultivated mindfulness, to be able to see clearly the reality in front of us. Because our mindfulness is not very clearly developed, because we haven't done the intentional balance training, the shamatha practice, then what we find is that when we sort of perceive our body, and again, we can look at our body, but generally our perception of the body is through the tactile sensations, that we have a sense, actually, don't we have a sense there's a single solid thing here, a body? That's sort of the perception that we have now, that it's a singular, solid, stable thing. I mean, intellectually, we know that the body's changing moment by moment, we know that, but how do we relate to our body? When we relate to our body, we experience the body as a single thing that's fairly static, unchanging. I think this is how we relate to our body. But if we were here, what we're doing is through the attentional balance training, shamatha practice, we are cultivating the mindfulness, and then we are applying that mindfulness here to investigate the body very closely. Is there really a single solid thing here that doesn't seem to change very much? Is that the reality of the body? Look closely. And that's what we did through doing the scan. We scanned through, and we actually come to see that actually it's just a mass of sensations. It's a mass of change here. That's what we actually see if we have good mindfulness. If we don't have good mindfulness, then it'll still feel like there's a solid singular thing here. That's why we saw in this model, and also in Buddhist context, if we don't first engage in attentional balance training or shamatha practice, then we can do this Vipassana practice again and again and again and again, and not come to any insights, because we'll scan the body and we go, oh yeah, there's a head here, there's a chest here, a leg here, and it seems like these are solid things that we're looking at, because we're not being able to see clearly what's actually present, because our mindfulness is not well developed. But if we develop that mindfulness well in shamatha, then we look here and we look very closely. What you will experience is just a mass, a flow of sensations. That's what you will experience. And then experientially, you will now see that the body is just constant change. Then the way we perceive the body will change, because now we're experientially seeing the body is changing moment by moment through this Vipassana practice. And that will have enormous change in our life if we can really bring that into experience. But again, if we don't cultivate mindfulness first in shamatha practice, then we can do this Vipassana practice again and again and not really get anywhere. And we'll go, well, yeah, so I know my body's changing, but so what? Nothing's happening. I mean, I'm still seeing the body in the same way as I was before. So this is what we're trying to achieve. And this is what the article was saying, that we really need to have that attentional balance training first, cultivated the mindfulness, so then when we apply it here, we can overcome this cognitive dysfunction, or this distorted way of seeing the body. Does that sort of answer the question?
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Any questions from the chat yet, Nitzan?
I would like to ask.
I've got a question here.
I would like to ask you if you think it is useful to use the concept of middle way when we speak about all these balances and imbalances. What do you think?
Yeah, exactly. That's why we talk about deficit and hyperactivity. Too little, too much. So middle way is just right. And so that concept of middle way is going to be a big topic that we're going to talk about in the next session in terms of the emptiness insight. Because in fact, we are trying to find the middle way between deficit and hyperactivity. Not enough and too much. We're trying to find the middle. Exactly. So very good point. And that will become very clear in the next session.
Thank you.
Sure. Another question? I think someone else put their hand up here. Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
You hear me?
Yes, sure.
First, thanks, as we all do. Thanking you very much. It's a great experience.
Sure.
My question is just for the exercise, purely for the exercise. If I would like to visualize how it looks, say we cultivate all that is taught through this article, through this teaching, through this lesson, the 3 meetings or the full
Sure.
lot of it. How would we visualize the way it looks over there? Let's say we cultivate it all and we are there. How does it look? What are the challenges there? If you could a little bit elaborate so we could know where we're aiming more clearly and more precisely.
We'll be looking at how to integrate all of this in 2 weeks' time in the last session. The whole last session of this program will dedicate to integrating how to integrate all this together with some practical advice. But what we've seen so far, just to answer briefly, is that each one of these 4 areas of mental balance is crucial. That if we leave out any one of these 4, then we will find it very difficult to effectively strive for mental balance and well-being. Because each one of these 4 areas is very important. That's what the article was trying to highlight, that to have an effective way of striving for that well-being, we need to cover these 4 bases. And similarly, within Buddhism, with a Buddhist context, we find it very similar, that we often hear about the 2 main practices of wisdom and compassion. We need to engage in those, which is correlating with the wisdom is the cognitive balance we're doing here, and the compassion is the emotional balance, which we'll be doing next time. But both of those are on the basis of the shamatha practice, the attentional balance that we did last 2 weeks ago. So these are often presented as the 3 main core areas of practice in Buddhism, that we need to have an integrated approach there. But also in all the Buddhist traditions, those 3 core areas of practice are on the basis of having established a foundation. And the foundation is what we are calling here motivational balance, or in Buddhism, the preliminary practices, to establish a good foundation for all of these 3 areas of practice. So also in the Buddhist context, if we want to really strive for genuine happiness and overcome our suffering, we need to make sure that we are covering all of these 4 areas, that we establish a foundation in the preliminary practices, we engage in the shamatha practice to cultivate a calm, clear, focused mind, and on that basis, we engage in both the wisdom and compassion practices, the Vipassana and compassion practices. How we can stick them all together, we're going to look at in more detail in 2 weeks' time in the last session. So I think you'll find more information there. And there's also some more practical advice. So that will come in 2 weeks' time. I think we've got time for at least one more question. Do we have anything in the chat, Nitzan, yet or not?
Yeah, we have a question here. Can you please elaborate on the all-pervasive suffering? Maybe how to meditate on it, how to use it?
Yeah. The all-pervasive is the most subtle. I mean, the suffering of suffering, or the dukkha of suffering, is easy. I mean, unpleasant experience, they're pretty obvious. The dukkha of change, the pleasant experience, is less obvious, because normally we identify pleasure as happiness. But if we look at them and reflect on them, we'll come to see they're not in the nature of happiness, that they're just temporary, transient experiences. They won't last. They can't last because they're stimulus-based. So that one, without too much difficulty, we could gain an insight into that. The all-pervasive is more subtle. And the all-pervasive is that the human condition is so that there's always a potential for suffering to arise in our life, no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, no matter what we're currently experiencing, that at any moment, suffering could arise. And to really gain an insight into that, we really have to appreciate that suffering is really coming from our mental afflictions. To really reflect on, another good reflection in this context would be pain, unpleasant experiences. Is unpleasant experiences in the nature of suffering or not? You know, the classic example I give is that, let's say we're outside and I think you can relate to this in Israel, particularly in the summertime. You go outside and it's maybe 40 degrees and you go out in the hot sun, you go, oh, I'm suffering so much. I'm suffering so much. Yeah, we those intense sensations of the sun on the skin, we go suffering, suffering, suffering. But then we go into a sauna, which is 80 degrees, twice intensity sensations. We go, oh, so nice, so nice. I like this. Wonderful, wonderful. Where it's twice as intense as the suffering from before. So therefore we can appreciate that those, what we term unpleasant or intense sensations, are not in the nature of suffering. But if we have aversion to that, then they become suffering. And so if we can really appreciate that, like what we label as pain is not suffering, but pain plus aversion equals suffering, if we can appreciate that, then we can really start to gain some insight into this all-pervasive by realizing no matter what stimulus is coming our way, these sensations or any other stimulus that we see as pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, then what comes out of that is determined by our mental afflictions. That if we have aversion, then definitely the unpleasant ones will be suffering. And so by doing that, then we can really start to gain this deepest insight, to come to realize that all pervasive, we're stuck here because the source of our suffering and the source of our happiness lies within our own mind. So that, by reflecting on that in that way, can be very, very helpful to really gain the deepest insight into the human condition, that the all-pervasive is because we're in this situation because our mind is contaminated by the mental afflictions. That's the deepest insight. Okay, do we have any quick question? Otherwise, we'll take a break there. No more? Okay, yeah, it's time for a break. Let's take a 30-minute break. And in the next session, we'll move on to, first I'll give a brief, I'll do a meditation on this no self. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll move on to this emptiness, the fourth of the four insights, to overcome the cognitive dysfunction of grasping or seeing things which are dependent as independent. So that's going to come in the next session. So a lot to talk about there. Let's take a break first, come back in 30 minutes, and we will move into that topic.